Good morning. Good morning. Everyone hear me all right?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Happy to be with you here today on Mother's Day. Happy Mother's Day to all the mothers here. I want to thank again Tony Almeida for inviting me out and the Everyman's Bible class for inviting me out again as well. Mr. and Mrs. Hap Roberts, thank you very much for the generous donation that you made to the seminary in conjunction with these Sunday school lessons. The development office at Hood Seminary would also be mad at me if I didn't put a quick plug in for the seminary. We are located at 1810 Lutheran Synod Drive, right across the street from the Waffle House. We're Salisbury Seminary, and we have excellent faculty. Graduated from Duke, and, Yale, and Harvard, and Emory. Outstanding. And you can audit a class during the semester at Hood Seminary for $75. You can sit in on a class. You don't have to write any papers. You don't even have to contribute to the discussion if you don't want to. You can just sit and absorb. But I hope you'll consider doing that one day, or at least joining us for chapel or lunch at the seminary. Again, we're your seminary, and we want to invite you onto our campus and get to know us a little better. We began 2 weeks ago talking about resurrection, and we talked about resurrection as the inauguration of a new age. As the Apostle Paul understands it, the future has invaded the present and has inaugurated a new kind of time. We call it Messianic time, in which the promise of God to Abraham that all the nations of the earth would be blessed and come together is slowly being realized and carried out in the community known as the church. The church is brought into existence by the Holy Spirit on Pentecost, and its marching orders are to stand at the juncture of these two ages, the present age and the age to come, which has come forward from the future into the present through the resurrection of Christ. And so the church is supposed to function as a kind of vanguard community. It's a community of the future. It's supposed to point humanity in the direction of how things will be. And it does that by living how things will be in the here and now. We looked last week at Walter Rauschenbusch. He was known as the father of the social gospel movement. He was coming along at a time when a lot of folks were saying, we can't engage the world, we can't engage in politics, we can't engage in social reform until Christ returns, and when Christ returns, Christ will take care of it. And so in the meantime, while we're waiting for Christ to come back, we worship, we pray, we hold the fort together, but we are not to go out and venture out into the world. And Rauschenbusch thought that was ridiculous. He said, the Holy Spirit has been given, Christ is present out in the world, and it's the church's job to go meet the risen Lord out in those places where he's promised to be. In the hospitals, in prisons, amongst those people who are suffering and are experiencing hardship. The church cannot assume that Christ is where it is. It has to go where Christ is. And so he inaugurated, in many ways, a new approach to Christian social ethics, and we talked about him at length last week. And a lot of his reform efforts, he did not get to live to see them carried through, but folks say that they see a lot of Rauschenbusch, and some of you in this room might hold it against him, in FDR's New Deal, in Lyndon Johnson's Great Society. That's impetus to get out there and make changes in the world through social science, through government, through the power that is inherent in those two things. The guy who succeeded Rauschenbusch as sort of the next next great Christian social ethicist, his name was Reinhold Niebuhr, and we're going to spend some time talking about him this morning. His dates are 1892 to 1971. Like Rauschenbusch, he was the son of German immigrants, but he was not from the Northeast. He was born in Wright City, Missouri, on June 21st, 1892. Like Rauschenbusch, Niebuhr's father was a pastor in the German Evangelical Church, which doesn't exist, so you can't find it in the white pages or yellow pages. It's been absorbed into the United Church of Christ today. At his father's urging, Niebuhr attended Elmhurst College in Elmhurst, Illinois, and then later Eden Seminary in Webster City. Those were two denominational institutions of the German Evangelical Church. And then he followed that up with 2 years studying at Yale, which he admitted later were difficult years for him. He said he didn't fit into the elite Anglo-Saxon Protestant culture. He was a child of German immigrants, and he just didn't really fit into the skull and bones scene well there, but he was grateful for the education he was able to receive there. He said it liberated him from a lot of his Midwestern German provincialism. But he stayed 2 years there and then hightailed it out in New Haven. And he went back to the Midwest when he accepted a call to become pastor of Bethel Evangelical Church in Detroit, Michigan. When he arrived there, the church had 65 members, and when he left, about 10 years later, the membership had grown to 700 or more. So he was successful in getting that congregation to reach out beyond its German boundaries and brought in other ethnic groups into the mix. He liked preaching. He was very good at it. They say he was one of the best preachers of the 20th century. But after a while, he said, I came face to face with the limitations of preaching. You can deliver a good sermon, and it sticks with people until about 1 o'clock that day. And then they move on to other things, and they forgot what you said, and they come back, and you tell them again what you said the next week, and they, I never heard that before. It's just wonderful, wonderful. You are a profound person. We're so lucky to listen to you preach every day. And he said, I came to realize that what I was called to do was to give to Western civilization, and North America in particular, some sustained reflection on human sin and the way it manifests itself in our social and political systems. So he left Detroit and left that church and joined the faculty of Union Theological Seminary in New York in 1928. The president of the seminary heard him preach and lecture and immediately invited him to come to Union to interview for a faculty position. He had no research doctorate, and the majority of the faculty at Union Seminary opposed his hire. And the president of the seminary overruled the faculty and hired him and brought him on, and there was great angst and consternation among the faculty that this guy who had no research doctorate was now among their ranks. And he felt, the same kind of elitist scorn that he felt at Yale and New Haven. And gosh darn it, he was determined to prove them wrong. And boy, prove them wrong he did, because in a few short years he published one of the great works of the 20th century. It's called Moral Man and Immoral Society, published in 1932. And that was followed up in 1941 by the work he's most famous for. It's called The Nature and Destiny of Man. And the Modern Library ranked it number 18 at the top of its list of top 100 nonfiction books of the 20th century. In 1952, he suffered a severe stroke that impaired his left hand and the left side of his face and sort of diminished his his teaching and lecturing. But in 1964, Lyndon Johnson awarded him the Presidential Medal of Freedom, one of the highest awards that a civilian can get in this country. And he died June 1st, 1971 in Stockbridge, Massachusetts. I don't know if you are familiar with the New York Times columnist David Brooks, but many people consider David Brooks to be Niebuhr's heir apparent. Brooks is not Lutheran, he's Jewish, who has an interesting fascination with the Gospel of Matthew. So David Brooks is a really interesting person. If you haven't read some of his stuff, I really urge you to do that, because once you get to know Niebuhr, you will start to see a lot of Niebuhr in David Brooks. Senator McCain, John McCain and Barack Obama, both during the 2008 election, identified Niebuhr as someone that they had read and studied extensively, and someone that had influenced their thought on American public life. And more recently, James Comey, the former FBI director, it was discovered that he had put up a Twitter account in Reinhold Niebuhr's name. And he was putting up a bunch of different quotations from Reinhold Niebuhr on this Twitter feed. And Comey, as you might expect, was a big fan of Niebuhr. His undergraduate thesis at the College of William and Mary was on Reinhold Niebuhr and Jerry Falwell. And that would be an interesting thesis to read. Rauschenbusch died in 1918, and Niebuhr died in 1971. So Niebuhr got to see a good deal of the 20th century. A lot of the 20th century that Rauschenbusch obviously didn't get to see. He saw the Second World War, he saw the Holocaust, he saw the rise of Soviet communism, and while he was a fan of Rauschenbusch, he saw the limitations of Rauschenbusch, and he thought that Rauschenbusch had a too optimistic view of human beings. And so, as a way to correct Rauschenbusch's naivete, Niebuhr began an approach to Christian ethics that today we call in seminary, when we're teaching it, Christian realism. It's called Christian realism. And so to understand a little bit about Niebuhr's thought, we need to dive into what realism is. Machiavelli, infamous figure from your Western civilization class back in college, he said the job of the realist, and Machiavelli thought himself to be a realist, is to follow the truth of the matter rather than the imagination of it. Because the realist has to stick with the facts as they are and deal with the world as it presents itself to us, rather than imagine some world that we'd like to live in, some set of facts that we wish were the case. No, you have to deal with the situation that faces you. And realism, or the realist, is often differentiated from the idealist. And the idealist is thought to have a lot of unbounded optimism and enthusiasm for human beings and what they're capable of doing. The idealist says, there's nothing we can't do if we put our minds and hearts to it. We just often suffer from a lack of courage, and we need to have the courage to follow through with the power that resides in human nature. Niebuhr didn't like idealists, and he thought that idealists did a lot of damage out in the world. And so a lot of his project was to sort of function as a wet blanket to idealism and false human confidence, he thought, that human beings placed in themselves. And he marched his realism unapologetically under the banner of the Bible. He read the Bible in a unique way. beings. But why the Bible? I guess maybe at First Presbyterian Church, the authority and the reliability of the Bible is taken for granted. But outside the walls of the church, the Bible is not the authority that it used to be. It's thought, by some, particularly in secular corners of the university, the Bible is an outdated document. It's a product of pre-scientific civilizations that don't understand how the world works, and what we get is a very naive, primitive view of humanity that we've somehow progressed or gone beyond. Niebuhr, however, would comment that the Bibles took 1,300 years to come into existence. And that doesn't even count the hundreds of years that the stories that found their way into the Bible existed just by way of oral transmission around the campfire, that one generation would pass on to the next. And so he would say, if you have a book that has 1,300 years of information in there, a smart guy is going to take a look at that book to see what it says. Yes, it arrives on our doorstep in the garb of these primitive, ancient Near Eastern cultures, and they have strange ways of communicating, often ways that strike us as odd, not the way we would express ourselves. So, we have a tendency, I'm going to read the Bible today. We give it a go for about 10 minutes, and then oh my gosh, I just put this down, and then we pick up the newspaper or a novel, or go back to Facebook or some tweets, because that's a world that we understand. But the Bible is a strange kind of world, and it takes a lot of patience and discipline to work your way through it. But when you do, Niebuhr said, you will find truths about yourself, revelations about yourself that you will not find anywhere else. The truth of the Bible cannot be proven or demonstrated. And this is where Niebuhr would break with a lot of the fundamentalists at the time. You can't prove the truth of the Bible. The truth of the Bible is found in the fact that it makes better sense of the facts of human existence than any other document. It works. It makes sense of the situations in which we find ourselves. And the most important truth for Niebuhr of the Bible was that we are sinners. We're alienated from God, and we're in desperate need of redemption. Now, at this point, you might shrug your shoulders and say, well, I can hear that from any preacher out in the county on any given Sunday. What is so special about that? Niebuhr's gift was that he delivered this truth that's delivered out in the county Sunday after Sunday in a way that spoke powerfully to societal elites, senators, and congressmen, and presidents, and university faculty, philosophers, and social theorists. He translated this message that we are sinners in need of redemption in a way that struck them as profound and struck them as something that they had never considered or heard before. Niebuhr said that Western civilization has two parents. One parent is the Renaissance, and the other parent is the Reformation. The Renaissance, he says, in Western civilization has been ascendant since the 14th century, and it reached its height of power and influence in the 18th century. And the Reformation, of course, has been with us since the 16th century. The Renaissance is humanity's cheerleader and its champion. Today's Mother's Day, so to use a maternal analogy, the Renaissance is our mother who's always telling us that we're the brightest, the smartest, the best looking. It defends us against all criticism. principal calls us into his office. Our mother is there in 10 minutes to defend us and plead our case before the principal, pumps up our self-esteem, tells us there is nothing you can't do if you put your mind to it. The Reformation, I'm talking about the Protestant Reformation here, that movement ushered in by Luther and Calvin. It's that other side of mom. It's that other kind of mom. It's on our case all the time, and rightly so. Have you made your bed? Why don't you apply yourself? Can't you do anything right? You need to understand your limitations and do what you're good at, not what you think you're good at. The Reformation is that mother. And not surprisingly, humanity prefers Renaissance mom to Reformation mom. Humanity likes to be told how good it is, likes to be affirmed, likes to be pumped up, and doesn't want to hear the lecture from Reformation mom. And Niebuhr saw it as his duty to bring Reformation mom to bear on the household of Western civilization. Now, this was a Western civilization that, to put it mildly, had been very bad. 2 world wars, Holocaust, legalized segregation, colonialism. Western civilization needed a harsh lecture and a good spanking, said Niebuhr. And that's what he set about to do. And the way he did this was to revive something that the Renaissance has hated from the very beginning. And that's the doctrine of original sin. Now, Niebuhr is not a fundamentalist, so he doesn't believe that the story written in the first chapters of Genesis about the fall of the first parents, he doesn't take that to be literal historical fact. But he says it's a mythological story that through myth tells the truth about us like no other story. He goes back and he retrieves figures like Luther and Calvin and Augustine, and in particular the Apostle Paul. And Niebuhr loved the 7th chapter of Paul's letter to the Romans, because in that 7th chapter, Paul tells the Romans, the Roman Christians, that the problem facing you is not that you lack knowledge about what is right. The problem facing you is that you lack the will to follow through on what you know is right. And Paul in Romans 7 introduces to Western philosophy and Western ethical theory the problem that is called the problem of the will. It's not enough just to educate people in morality. You also have to fix this thing that's in them called the will. And from the will, we get the power to follow through on what we know is right. And ethical failures don't often take place up here in the head. They take place in here, in the heart and the will. We know this, I think. You who run businesses and institutions and companies, you have employee handbooks. And you have workshops. In this age of Me Too movement, we have a lot of education on sexual harassment and what's acceptable behavior in the workplace and what is not. So we have all these workshops and trainings. But guess what? Sexual harassment keeps going on. Even among those people who continue to sit in these workshops and read these manuals and sign these statements. Yes, I watched the video and I understand what is appropriate and what is not appropriate. Well, Paul and Niebuhr and Augustine would say, well, yeah, that's right. Because the problem is not that they lack knowledge up here, it's that they lack the willpower to follow through on what they know is wrong. Sin. We're sinners, says Niebuhr. But the way he went about talking about sin and how it manifests itself in the human person was very unique observes that human beings, he says, he's a very smart guy, and I wish I could dumb this down a little bit more, but I got to do justice to the heights of his thought. He says human beings exist in the flux and flow of nature and time. And what he meant by that is, you get up, you shower, you shave, you brush your teeth, you get dressed, you eat breakfast, you go to work, you return phone calls, you send emails, you have meetings, you get things done. And then you go home and eat dinner, maybe you watch 1 or 2 hours of TV, pick up that book on the nightstand that someone gave you for Christmas 3 years ago, and you try to make your way through 2 pages of it before you doze off, and then you get up and you do it again. That's us in the flux and flow of nature and time. And yet, there are moments in our day. I don't know when those moments come for you. They come for me when I'm either sitting at a stoplight or driving on the interstate. And we start daydreaming, looking out the window. And in those times, Niebuhr says, we momentarily step outside of that flow of nature and time, and we start to think and reflect on our life. And we start to ask ourselves some scary questions. Is what I'm doing mean anything in the long term, in the general scheme of things? What if I had taken that job instead of this job? What if I had gone to that school rather than this school? What if I had moved to this neighborhood rather than that neighborhood? What if we had one more kid? What if we stopped and didn't have that last kid? You start to reflect and question and think about your own existence. And this, Niebuhr says, is what separates us from the animals. The dogs, the birds, are just in the flux and flow of nature and time. They don't step out of that and think, oh, am I being a good dog? Am I serving a meaningful purpose in the world? That's what we do, and that's when things get scary for us, says Niebuhr. Our capacity to step outside ourselves and reflect on ourselves and our situation is a function, Niebuhr said, of our being created in the image of God. God can step back and reflect on the flux and flow of time and nature, and us being created in that one's image, we possess that ability to do that as well. We can transcend our present circumstances and start to ask serious questions about our life. Now, when we ask ourselves these questions, have I made the most of my life, my talents and my abilities? How will I be remembered? What will be my legacy? Will the world miss me when I'm gone? The answer to these questions are usually negative. At least they are for me. No, I have not made the most of my life so far, my talents and my abilities. After our funerals, they'll remember us for a while, but then slowly fade out from the memories of the living. The world finds a way to get on without us. Others will come along to take credit and complete the good things that we started, and because we were not able to complete them, and because we ran out of time. And then we freak out big time when we start asking ourselves these questions. And when we freak out, that's when Niebuhr says sin is lurking at the door. We are so worried that we won't be remembered, that we won't be recognized, that we won't be honored, that our impact on the world will not be something that others will take into account. That what we try to do in those moments is take nature and time and kind of bend it, manipulate it in such a way that we stop being just participants in it, but we try to control its flux and flow so that it is structured in such a way so that our personal greatness, our magnanimity is magnified and made available for all to see. But when we try to do that, we have to use power and coercion to accomplish that, to bend nature and time in our direction so that it serves us. And so we're anxious about our place in the universe, and when we try to solidify or make our place in the universe known, we end up doing bad things. And this is the temptation in the garden. This is a modern manifestation of our desire, Niebuhr says, to be like God. Secretly, we don't want God to be God. We want to be God ourselves. We want to run the show. We want other people to listen to us and take orders from us. We stop trusting God with our existence and existence altogether, and we start entering into conflict and power struggle with one another. As Niebuhr puts it, the ego does not feel secure, and it therefore grasps for more power in order to make itself feel secure. It does not regard itself as sufficiently significant or respected or feared, and therefore seeks to enhance its position in nature and society. And you don't have to go further than a family reunion to see this manifest itself when relatives try to enhance their power in the group over others and make decisions about where the family is going. And then you get that clash of wills, people trying to take things in their particular direction. That's a long way to then getting to Niebuhr's main point. Societies, institutions, businesses, all kinds of human organizations, school boards, elementary schools, city councils, are all composed of people who are trying to exert their power and their authority over the situation. Every time human beings get in a room together, there is an inevitable power struggle. People want their way. They want to exert their dominance. They want to make manifest their significance and their power. And what they're really seeking to do, says Niebuhr, is acquire that which only properly belongs to God, and that's immortality. Now, we can handle these people at the level of individuals. We know how to handle people who are trying to exert their influence. But the problem is when these people get into institutions and societies and take charge of things that make big impacts on the world, a lot of damage is done. The larger the group of people, says Niebuhr, the more difficult it is to manage and correct human sinfulness. The individual might be capable of goodness on a small scale, but when an aggregate of sinful people get together and start doing things, bad things often take place. Stalinism attaches itself to communism. The Puritans come and desire to build a city on the hill in the New World, but that project is accompanied by slavery and Native American genocide. There's great promise in capitalism and what it can do for our society, but that's also accompanied by Bernie Madoffs and Enrons and the bundling and selling of subprime mortgages. Churches that are designed to promote abundant life tend to, or they have, in the case of the Roman Catholic Church in particular, they turn blind eyes to pedophilia and all kinds of abuse of power. So Niebuhr said, if you want to engage in politics as a Christian, you have to understand that when you are in the political arena, you're dealing with sinful people who are trying to maximize their own power. All police forces need an internal affairs department. The stock market needs the SEC. The military military needs to be controlled by civilians. And Niebuhr would be quite alarmed to see the political atmosphere today in this country. The American electorate seems to be on the lookout for messiah figures, someone who's just going to step in and fix it. And I'm not just talking about Donald Trump. Niebuhr would also be horrified when Barack Obama came out in Mile High Stadium in Denver like this messianic figure who was going to deliver everybody by his sheer force of will. We live in this world of the Avengers where we want a superhero to come down and fix everything unilaterally and right away. And Niebuhr's message would be, Iron Man only exists on the silver screen. Iron Man doesn't exist in reality. What we have are sinners in need of redemption running the world. And so because these people are running the world, you have to arrange society so that their power is checked, so that they cannot get everything done that they want to do. And this, Niebuhr said, this is the genius of the United States Constitution. He said it's a product of people who believed in the doctrine of original sin. A product of people who did not trust any one person with too much power and set up a system of government to keep power in check. His advice for people in this room who run businesses and nonprofits and organizations: structure your institution in such a way so that no one person can exert too much power over a particular situation. And this applies to the church as much as it does to a business or a government or a city council or a school board. A world in which not everybody can get everything they want is a world in which justice will take place. So when he would urge Christians to get out there in the political arena, and he did, he said it's our obligation as Christians to get out there. He said you have to recognize the facts on the ground. You have to recognize the facts that people are trying to maximize their power and take things in directions that suit them rather than the general interest. So you have to put checks on power. You have to use power against power at the same time that you realize that you yourself are someone who can and will abuse power if given the opportunity to do so. So with that, I want to give you enough time for your 11 o'clock service, but we can follow up on some of these ideas that Niebuhr has put forward, and if you want to come chat about them, I'm happy to do this after I step away from this podium. But again, thank you for your attention and your patience. And
what's next week?
Next week, we're going to look at the life of Jesus and the lessons that the life of Jesus has for us about human politics. So thank you very much for today.